the answer is not the same if you look at corporate R&D or if you look at public R&D. If you look at it from the business point of view, corporate R&D, there are huge differences between sectors in terms of timing. So longer term planning makes sense for industries like, let's say, pharmaceuticals, because in pharmaceuticals, when you develop a new molecule, you have to plan 10 years, 20 years in advance. There's a long series of tests you have to make. There are different stages. There's massive investment to mobilize. And then you hope to enjoy your new product, your innovation for a certain number of years or decades. But it's completely different if you look at startups. In the startup field, basically, you want to have a new idea that can reach the market within a matter of months, if not weeks. So longer term planning does not make sense as it would make in pharmaceuticals. If we look at the public side, typically government supported types of efforts, then we have a different kind of equation. We look at innovation policies that need to be supported for multiple industries. And there, among the big lessons that we learned from both NRI and GII and other similar efforts, one lesson is critically important, which is that stop and go doesn't work. That is, governments cannot afford to support innovation and technology access in one sector and then 2 years later choose another sector because it's more fashionable or more sexy. You have to stick to your guns. You have to have longer term strategic views and make sure that these views can be pursued with consistent policies, even if the government changes, which is often the difficult part. So to summarize, if you look at the private sector, clearly you have very differentiated answers to that question, depending on the kind of industry you look at. If you consider the public sector side, you need the longer term view to guarantee that innovation is sustained and technology remains accessible. A second way in which we need to be very precise in the word we use is about what do we mean in terms of access to technology. There are basically three ways to access technologies. Either you produce the technology yourself. Second possibility, you adapt existing technologies to specific means and intentions. And the third one is you buy technology from those who have it. And these three ways of accessing technologies create different opportunities, but also different needs in terms of what you need to do in terms of planning. If you want to create technology, that's typically an area where you are going to need support from the public sector because it is high risk, it is longer term, and you never know what's going to happen. If you want to use existing technology and innovate incrementally, then it's less expensive, it's less risky, and that's something that the private sector alone may consider doing. If you want to acquire technology, that's a totally different ballgame. Depending on the size of the investment you consider, you may do it as a small or medium-sized enterprise. You buy a patent, for instance, which is within your means. If you are a bigger industry, you may consider buying larger, more expensive patents or acquiring the innovative company that has created the technology. If you are a government, public sector, you have different ways of buying the technology through sovereign funds, through a number of mobilization of national tools, which may also involve venture capitalists and other parts of the private sector. So second precision we need to bring to that question is what kind of access do we consider? And depending on which of the three, buying, improving, or creating, we have different possibilities at hand. We have to consider, and that will be my conclusion on this question, that when you think longer term in terms of technology or in terms of innovation, you have to make a difference between science and technology. What innovation is very much based on now, disruptive innovation, is more and more deep science. A way to define the difference between science and technology is the following. Science is what a grandmother can teach to a granddaughter, and technology is the other way around. That for me is one of the better definitions that gives us an idea of what we are dealing with when we consider long-term and innovation or access to technology. We have to think in terms of education, we have to think in terms of deep science. Global indices such as NRI and GII are not exclusively addressed to governments. There are global benchmarks that may be of value for investors, for private decision makers, and also for ordinary citizens in determining their own strategies in terms of, what kind of education should I get, what kind of job should I be looking for. So it's individuals, it's businesses, and it is governments. When we consider research and development policies, as I mentioned before, we have to consider the private sector side of it and the public sector side of it. What global indices are really about is to benchmark the efforts made by governments. And benchmarking in two ways, benchmarking across time and benchmarking across geographies. Benchmarking across time means that these global indices help governments keep track of what they've done in the past, what has worked, what has not worked, and help them improve, in that sense, on their own policies. Geographical benchmarking means that looking at the experience of other countries, one can draw a number of lessons from the experience of others for two reasons. First, not to repeat the mistakes made by others, and second, find inspiration by adapting the recipes for success to local constraints and possibilities. Global indices have the power to provide the global picture. A global picture does not mean just to look at the globe. It means to consider issues globally in their interdependence between different sectors, between different constraints, between different possibilities where governments can invest. What I mean by that is, let's imagine a country that has determined that they want to improve their technology policies or their development, their innovation policies. And they might say, we must do that on the basis of the comparative advantages we have today. We have a certain number of assets and a certain number of obstacles and disadvantages. Let's build on the first category and let's try to mitigate the second one, that is the disadvantages. And to do that, they have to consider the long term. It's not just about putting money in new technology. It is also about building talents. Where are the engineers, the managers, the leaders, the thinkers that will help the country take advantage of new technologies and of innovation? This is about education, but it is also about social interaction. It is also about culture. It is about a number of dimensions that go far beyond just what you are immediately interested in. And this is where the full power of these indices, and NRI and GII are just two examples among many of them, is to help decision makers, especially in the public sector, to consider the interaction between these different spheres. If you invest in acquiring new patents, in building the new tools, the new machines of the future, but you don't have the human talent, if you don't have the social coherence that will make changes socially acceptable, you're going to waste your money. With the use of these global indices, governments, private sector and individuals, ordinary citizens, have learned to consider that nothing is simple. You cannot deal with climate change with thinking only about climate change. You need to think about inequalities. You need to think about fighting poverty. You need to think about what are you going to destroy in terms of existing industrial structures when you want to build something else. And this education process, I'm happy to say, has been accelerated by these indices, and the best we can hope if that will continue in the future.